Lloyd is a young boy whose entire village was destroyed as collateral damage in the fight against the Demon Lord. You can tell by the look on his eyes that he has clearly seen some crazy trauma-inducing stuff, and when Merlin finds him standing there, she feels guilty because it was her carelessness that led to this destruction. To atone for her mistake, she decides to take Lloyd in and give him a new home with her. And while he's living with her, she also decides to train him in the ways of magic. The first spell she tries teaching Lloyd is the Flame spell, and her teaching method basically involves showing Lloyd the spell for approximately 3 seconds, and then telling him you won't get dinner today if he can't replicate the spell on his own. Against all odds, by evening time, Lloyd finally manages to create a small flame in his hand, but when he shows it to Merlin, instead of being supportive, she calls his fire puny and singes his eyebrows with a wall of flame for not doing it well enough. But she does let him have dinner since he learned the spell. The next day, Merlin switches training subjects and tells Lloyd he will be learning water magic today. She gives him a small demonstration and swipes her foot across the ground, creating a small spout of water. She then asks Lloyd to do the same, but after trying it, all he is able to do is make the ground a little wet, and he seems pretty proud of himself. But Merlin isn't impressed, so she pours a ton of water on Lloyd to show him what real water magic looks like. As time goes on, Lloyd's training continues with him doing his best to learn spells and Merlin punishing him for not doing it well enough. But as it turns out, her training methods are actually really effective because by wintertime, Lloyd's skill with magic has improved so much that he can now create a snow sculpture of Merlin with a wave of a finger. It was a thoughtful gesture and Merlin does appreciate it, but she doesn't want to break character. So she takes control of the snow sculpture and grabs Lloyd with it while making it 30 feet tall to show him what real snow manipulation looks like. The snow then crumbles and Lloyd falls to the ground, but the two of them have a good understanding of each other by this point, so as soon as he digs himself out of the snow, he tells Merlin he will work harder on his magic, and she smiles in acknowledgement. More time goes by, and one morning, Merlin is laying on her couch with a massive hangover because she drank too much last night. Lloyd goes to check on her and asks if she's alright, but Merlin tells him she feels absolutely terrible. Lloyd wants to help, so he puts his hand on her forehead and activates his white magic to help her recover from her hangover, and after a few seconds, Merlin suddenly feels a lot better. She sits upright and hugs Lloyd while thanking him for healing her. But now that she's back on her feet, she says it's time for them to get back to his magic training, so she drags Lloyd outside again. Things go on like this for years, but one day, Merlin receives a book in the mail that has her very concerned. Just then, Lloyd knocks on her door to tell her that dinner is ready, so she tells him she's coming and starts putting the book away. However, as she is doing so, she accidentally drops the book in front of Lloyd, so he bends down to pick it up, and as soon as his hands touch the book, all sorts of information floods his mind in an instant. Lloyd passes out from the sudden data dump, and when Merlin realizes what happened, she's astonished because Lloyd has the qualities of the Chosen One. She takes Lloyd to bed for now, but if he really is the Chosen One, then she can't let him make the same mistakes she did. She kisses his forehead and there's a faint glow left behind as she places a spell on him because she can't let Lloyd become overconfident in his power like she was. The next day, Lloyd's training continues and this time Merlin takes him out into the forest so he can practice his white magic. Lloyd uses it on a single fruit to make it grow ripe and juicy, and Merlin praises him for doing a good job, but she also wants to show him that he still has a long way to go, so she puts her hand on the tree and uses white magic to make the entire thing grow lush and green. Later that night, Merlin is helping Lloyd study and explains to him that there are some orcs who can use rare magic to control monsters. While reading, Lloyd notices something called ancient magic, but as soon as he mentions it, Merlin's mood shifts and she tells him he doesn't need to learn ancient magic. Some of Merlin's other lessons include learning how to summon your magic staff as quickly as possible, but since Lloyd didn't do it fast enough, she knocks him over with her own staff. She then tells Lloyd that he must never neglect his training, no matter how powerful he may become, and Lloyd promises to always remain diligent. The next lesson involves learning about magic stones, so Merlin explains that they are a crystallized form of magic, and its power can turn surrounding objects into magic stones as well. A few years go by, and one day during one of Merlin's lessons, she takes Lloyd out into the middle of nowhere, gives him a knife, and tells him he has to survive in this forest and make it home on his own. She then skedaddles before Lloyd can make any objections, so he really is stuck out here now. And as soon as Merlin is gone, a white wolf walks into view and immediately attacks Lloyd. Lloyd runs for his life and ends up crawling up a tree to hide from the wolf. He doesn't think magic from a white mage like him would be enough to defeat a monster like that, so his only option is to run home while avoiding any and all monster encounters. But with that said, when he uses magic to scan the area so he can figure out which direction to go, he discovers that he's really far from home right now. He has no choice but to start slowly making his way through the forest, and when night falls, he spends his time studying his spells to make as many improvements as possible. Several days go by like this, and at one point, Lloyd accidentally steps on a twig that alerts a giant spider to his presence. Lloyd starts panicking and immediately runs in the opposite direction, while using a haste spell to boost his speed enough to outrun the spider. Eventually, he manages to make it home in one piece, but he collapses from exhaustion right outside the door, and when Merlin sees him, she is really proud of him for making it back on his own. A few more years go by, and one day, while Lloyd is busy cleaning, he notices a book on Merlin's desk about a town. So he asks her if he can borrow the book out of curiosity, and she tells him he can have it. By this point, Lloyd has pretty much completed his training, so he doesn't have to deal with Merlin's constant lessons anymore, but now, every other day, she drags him off to help her develop new magic because Lloyd's talent for spell development is great, and he's glad she's treating him as an equal now. But he hasn't gotten any sleep in the past week because Merlin keeps making him stay up all night for the sake of magic research. He's starting to get sick of all the constant pressure, and he is still really curious about what town life is like, so he eventually makes a drastic decision. The next morning, Merlin heads up to Lloyd's room to ask for his help on some more magic research. But to her surprise, he is nowhere to be found, and judging by the book on his desk, she has a good idea of where he went. Meanwhile, Lloyd has just arrived in the town, and as he is walking through the streets, he is amazed by how busy everyone is. Since this is the first time he has ever been in a town, once he buys a piece of bread, he runs out of money entirely, so he realizes he needs to find a job soon. And as luck would have it, an adventurer recruitment poster blows straight into his face, so Lloyd decides to sign up for the position. All the while, a mysterious man has been following Lloyd, and he seems rather intrigued by Lloyd's choice. After Lloyd signs up to join the adventurer's party, he heads to the top of the castle with his new party to fight a giant cyclops. The leader of the party, Alan, asks the healer, Sheena, to heal him. But right when Sheena is about to do so, Lloyd casts his refined stat buff magic, so everyone feels better than ever. However, none of them realize that Lloyd was the one behind it since he didn't say anything. After the buff, the archer shoots the cyclops' eye, and the knight blocks one of its punches, and she is honestly shocked by how easy it was. However, Alan doesn't question his sudden boost in strength at all and proceeds to one-shot the Cyclops, while completely convinced that he did it on his own. But the knight seems to have noticed that Lloyd had something to do with their sudden increase in power. Anyway, now that the Cyclops has been taken care of, the party rides back into town, and Alan is being hailed as a hero because the Cyclops is apparently so hard to beat that no one else in town was able to do it. As expected, the reward for defeating the Cyclops was huge, but Alan only gives Lloyd 5 coins and says the low pay is because he's only a new D-rank adventurer. Lloyd accepts the money and doesn't complain, but when Alan suggests a toast to the party's victory, Lloyd excuses himself because he doesn't want to be involved. The party's mage gets offended that Lloyd doesn't want to drink with them, but Alan tells her it's fine since they can always hire another white mage, and it's not like he contributed much to the party's performance anyway. Meanwhile, back at Merlin's house, the man who was watching Lloyd earlier shows up, and Merlin asks him if he has any updates on Lloyd. Will tells her that Lloyd arrived in the town and has just joined the hero party, and Merlin is relieved to hear that Lloyd is safe. She figured it was about time for him to venture out on his own and experience the world, and as long as he doesn't become arrogant like she did when she was younger, she thinks he will be okay. We'll ask her if she still has regrets about what happened that day, and Merlin's lips curl in self-hatred as she remembers her mistake. Back then, the Demon Lord was willing to self-destruct to seize the magic book, something that Merlin failed to anticipate. As a result, an entire village was nuked, killing everyone nearby in an instant, including Merlin. Fortunately, her party member, Sybil, was able to use powerful ancient magic to revive everyone who died to the Demon Lord's explosion, but it cost him his life, and Merlin has been blaming herself for it ever since. Back to Lloyd's adventures, he is still part of the hero party. Every time Alan or the others are struggling in combat, he always casts buffs on them to make their battles easier. Thanks to him, they have a near-perfect victory record, and everyone is always performing at top capacity, but none of them realize how much Lloyd is carrying the team. Later that night, Rena is reading up on defense when Alan stumbles into her room to see what she's up to. She tells him she's just curious about something, since the impact of monsters' attacks on her shield hasn't been as hard lately, and she doesn't understand why. Alan admits that he has been feeling a lot stronger lately too, but he assumes it's just his natural talent at work. However, Rena reminds him that he hasn't been training much recently, so there's no reason for him to have suddenly gotten stronger. Meanwhile, out in the forest that night, a group of guards are finishing their nightly patrols when all of a sudden, one of them screams out in pain. The other looks up and sees this giant golem standing over him. And in that moment, he realizes that he's really going to die because of a minimum wage job. The next morning, the guard captain meets with Alan to ask for his help. He explains that the guards that were on night patrol yesterday were killed in brutal fashion. Alan immediately accepts the request since he thinks it should be easy enough to defeat a golem. Later that day, they head to the site of the attack, and thanks to Lloyd's tracking magic, they are able to locate the golem in a cave behind the waterfall. Since Lloyd is still supporting everyone, they are able to easily defeat the golem, but there's a demon nearby who creates another one from the rocks on the ceiling. Lloyd takes a closer look at the demon and realizes is using his staff with a magic stone to control the golem, and magic stones are very dangerous, so he needs to take charge and act quickly before anything goes wrong. He casts an accuracy buff spell and orders Lulu to fire an arrow at the demon. Lulu is a bit surprised by Lloyd's sudden order, especially since the demon is hiding behind a wall, but she does it anyway and her arrow somehow manages to connect. Lloyd then orders Mia to teleport the staff over to him, and as soon as she does so, Lloyd casts a spell to seal its power. Alan is getting pissed by the fact that Lloyd is ordering the others around when he's supposed to be the leader, so he tries to assert his dominance by charging in to deliver the final blow on the golem. Lloyd doesn't want to let him die, so he casts a speed boost spell on himself and runs forward to push Alan out of the way before the golem could squish his head. However, Alan doesn't even acknowledge the fact that Lloyd just saved his life and yells at him for getting in his way. Alan then proceeds to finish the golem off, and when everyone gets back to town, he fires Lloyd for getting on his nerves. He also accuses him of slacking off and never doing anything to help the team, and because of all the years of Merlin telling him his skills weren't good enough, Lloyd naturally believes he must be the problem here. He agrees to leave the party without much of a fuss, and over the next few days, he tries to find a new party to join, but it's really difficult since most parties are already full and white mages aren't in high demand. However, as luck would have it, a girl named Yui happens to really need a white mage, so as soon as she finds Lloyd, she grabs his hand and begs him to join her party. Yui drags Lloyd off to meet her party members, and they are surprised that she's back so soon. They assume she wasn't able to find a new white mage for their party since it'd be practically impossible to find one on such short notice. But to their surprise, Yui points to Lloyd and says he will be joining their party. There's just one problem with that though. Yui dragged Lloyd here without explaining anything to him, so he never agreed to join their party in the first place. The others had a feeling it was too good to be true, so they tell Yui they should just give up on the quest they were supposed to take on since they can't handle it without a white mage, and there's no guarantee that Lloyd would be strong enough to replace Clum in the first place. Everyone seems to agree that taking the quest as they are now is too risky, but Yui doesn't want to let their client down because she really needs help. Lloyd doesn't know all the details here, but he can tell that the quest is important, so he asks if they can just let some other party handle it instead. However, they tell him that there's no one else available to do it. The quest is A-rank difficulty, so only parties that are A-rank and above are allowed to accept the quest, but all the A-rank parties in the capital are already out on other missions, so no one's available. Yui's party is S-rank, so they meet the requirements for the mission, but since their usual white mage is gone, they would need to find a replacement. Unfortunately, according to the guild's rules, parties are only allowed to work with people who are registered as official members, so they can't just borrow a white mage from another party, and finding one who is unaffiliated on such short notice is pretty much impossible. Lloyd would love to help them, but he genuinely thinks he isn't strong enough to be of any help to an S-rank party. However, before he can say anything, Yui asserts that everything will be fine as long as they have Lloyd on their team. They end up taking Lloyd out into a field because they need to assess his abilities before he can join their party, but again, Lloyd never actually agreed to any of this. They end up taking him out into a field and Yui asks Lloyd to give them a demonstration of his power, but he is worried that his abilities will probably be disappointing to them since they are S-rank just like his master. Dagus tells Yui that it's not fair to put Lloyd on the spot like that and ask him to display his power, but if she's going to hold a test, she should at least specify what spell she wants him to use. Dagus has a point, so Yui tells Lloyd that he needs to cast enchantment magic on all of them, but Lloyd is shocked because that sounds way too easy to be an S-rank party test. Just to confirm, he asks her if she really just wants him to cast enhancement magic on everyone here, and Yui tells him he's right, but she wants him to cast it on all of them at once. This confuses Lloyd even more because he has cast enhancement magic on multiple targets several times, and it's barely even an inconvenience for him. So how could something like this be a test? At first he thinks there must be some hidden requirement they aren't telling him about, but nope. All they want is for Lloyd to cast enhancement magic on them, and to be honest, they think something like this might be too difficult for him. They ask Lloyd if he can do it, and Lloyd says he can, but he still doesn't really understand why the test is so easy. He summons his staff and proceeds to cast the enhancement magic, but Yui is more focused on the fact that he just summoned his staff out of nowhere. She asks Lloyd where he got that, so he explains that it was just some basic storage magic, so it's not a big deal. More importantly, he wants to know what Yui thinks of the enhancement magic he cast on her. Yui hadn't even realized that Lloyd had cast any magic, but now that she thinks about it, she does feel a bit stronger than normal. The others can feel the effects as well, but it seems different from normal enhancement magic for some reason, so Yui takes out her sword to do a little test. She takes a practice swing at a tree, and even though she didn't intend to, she effortlessly slices through the tree in one swing. She can hardly believe what she just did, but Lloyd thinks it's normal for the enhancements he cast. Yui and the others were only expecting him to cast strength enhancements, but he thought that was too easy, so they also cast defense, speed, mana, and vitality buffs on them as well. The others are in utter disbelief after seeing what Lloyd is capable of, so they just stand there for a second and stare at him. Lloyd misinterprets their silence for disappointment, so he assumes he must have messed up somehow. He apologizes for wasting their time since they obviously don't want a white mage like him in their party, but before he could leave, Yui calls him back because she can't let someone as talented as him go. She also wants to learn more about Lloyd, so she asks him some questions, and she eventually finds out that Lloyd was previously part of the Hero Party. Yui thinks it's a really big deal since the Hero Party is well known throughout the kingdom, but Lloyd says he was fired for apparently lacking power, so he doesn't think he was very useful to them. Dagus and the others tell Lloyd that it makes no sense, since they've never seen someone cast so many types of enhancement magic at once before, but Lloyd is convinced that there are bound to be people in this world who are stronger than him. He tells Yui and the others that they'd be better off just getting their former white mage to come back, but that's not really an option for Yui's party because Clum, the party's white mage, has a little sister who's really sick. Up until recently, Clum has been taking care of her sister every day while also adventuring, but has been wearing her down a lot. So much so that she isn't able to focus on the battlefield, which is why she ended up quitting. They all know that Clum only quit because she didn't want to be a liability to them, and they don't want to see her go, but they have to respect her decision. That's why they've been looking for a replacement white mage to take over for her. Normally, they just do the quest without a white mage, but A-rank quests are particularly difficult to handle without a dedicated healer. Lloyd can tell that everyone cares about Clum a lot, and he'd like to help them out if he can, so he asks them what Clum's sister is sick with. Yui doesn't know much about it, but she does know that it's an illness that's turning Clum's sister's body into Magistones. Lloyd remembers reading about Magistones turning other things into Magistones as well, and ever since then, he's been trying to figure out a way to reverse the process, so he thinks he can help. He asks Yui to lead him to Clum's house, and a little while later, they arrive at her house. Clum is surprised to see Yui and a stranger here, but she lets them in so they can chat. Lloyd apologizes ahead of time because what he's about to ask might be rude, but he wants to know every detail about how Clum's sister got sick. Clum doesn't mind filling him in on what happened, so she explains that she and her sister, Sylvie, used to adventure together all the time, but during one particular quest, Sylvie got injured, and she's been unconscious ever since. Yui asks if it was a monster that injured Sylvie, but honestly, Clum has no idea what actually happened because Sylvie had already collapsed by the time she was found. Lloyd asks what symptoms Sylvie is suffering from, but Clum thinks it would be much quicker to just show him what happened instead. She leads Yui and Lloyd to the door to Sylvie's bedroom, but she warns them to brace themselves because they may not be ready for what they are about to witness. As soon as Clum opens the door, Lloyd and Yui are hit with a wave of unpleasant mana, and it's all coming from Sylvie. Clum takes the covers off Sylvie's body and reveals that her arms and feet have already begun to transform. This is the first time Lloyd has actually seen the effect of magic stones on a person, and he is shocked by how bad it actually is. Sylvie's mana has gone out of control for some reason, and it's causing her body to transform bit by bit, so it's only a matter of time before she is entirely consumed by the Magistones. Lloyd asks Clum to let him take a look at Sylvie, since he has something he wants to try, and if his hypothesis is correct, then he might be able to cure Sylvie. Clum finds it hard to believe that Lloyd would be able to cure Clum when all the best healers in the country could do nothing for her. Lloyd tells her that Sylvie's sickness is likely the result of her being pierced by high-purity Magistones. He asks Clum if the cave Sylvie got hurt and had a high mana density, and Clum confirms that he's right. In fact, the quest they were on that day was to gather Magistones from the cave, so that might have something to do with it. Lloyd asks her to show him where Sylvie's wound is, so Clum points at it, and just as Lloyd had expected, a Magistone must have entered Sylvie's body through her wound, and the Magistone's mana is what's transforming her. So far, all of Lloyd's deductions have been correct, so Yui asks Clum to put her faith in him so he can perform the operation to save Sylvie's life. Once everything is ready, Lloyd casts a spell and begins draining mana straight out of Sylvie's body, but absorbing all that dark energy is really taking a toll on him. Sylvie's illness was caused by her mana going berserk after being afflicted by a Magistone, so if Lloyd wants to turn her back to normal, then he needs to remove as much mana as possible from Sylvie's body. But he also needs to make sure he doesn't accidentally kill her from mana depletion, so he plans to heal her while simultaneously draining her mana. He begins casting the spells, but Clum doesn't recognize the heal spell that Lloyd just used, so she asks him if there's anything different about it. Lloyd explains that he needs to do something with all the extra energy he's getting from Sylvie's body, so he's going to use an inferior heal spell to burn it since the version of the heal spell consumes a lot of mana. Yui doesn't know much about white mage lingo, so she asks Clum if what Lloyd is doing is impressive. However, impressive doesn't even begin to describe what Lloyd is doing. He's using a spell that he designed on his own, and he's casting 2 types of magic alone, which is already impressive, but he also has more willpower than any normal person. As Lloyd continues healing, the Magistone transformation on Sylvie's body begins to regress, and by the time Lloyd is done, she is finally returned to normal. That took a lot of effort to pull off, so Lloyd is winded now that he has completed it. Before long, Sylvie finally wakes up, and Clum is brought to tears at the sight of her little sister awake and alert again. Clum thanks Lloyd and Yui for everything they have done for her, but once Sylvie is back to full health, she plans to go adventuring with her again. Yui is disappointed that Clum won't be rejoining her party, but she understands that Clum needs to stick by her sister's side, so she heads down the hall and says goodbye. Lloyd is about to leave as well, but before he goes, Clum calls him back and asks him to take good care of the party for her. Lloyd tells her he isn't even an official party member yet, and he thinks he's still too weak to be useful. Clum has no idea what Lloyd means when he calls himself weak, but she tells him to let his heart make the decision for him. Later that evening, Yui and Lloyd tell all the others about Sylvie being cured, and they all praise Lloyd for his hard work. However, since Clum said she wouldn't be returning, they are going to have to reevaluate their future as a party. Lloyd has come to like everyone here in a short amount of time he has known them, and he can tell that they all genuinely care for their teammates, unlike the hero party. He nervously asks them if they'd still want to accept him as their healer, and everyone was kind of hoping he would eventually agree to join them, so this is really good news for their party. To celebrate Lloyd officially joining their party, Yui tells him he can eat as much as he wants tonight because they'll cover the bill, and that's the nicest thing anyone has done for Lloyd since he came to this city. He digs in and starts devouring plate after plate of food because it tastes incredible to him. But the others don't understand why he's praising the food so much because this is pretty average for the city. Lloyd can't believe such complex flavors are considered average here, and it makes him start to question the food he ate as a child. The others ask what kind of food Lloyd used to eat, so he explains that he just ate whatever mushrooms or herbs his master grew in the garden with some meat hunted from the forest. But his master had the cooking skills of someone who considers salt spicy, so the food she made was always bland. Yui asks Lloyd to tell them what kind of person his master is because cooking skills aside, if she was able to teach Lloyd such impressive magic, then she must be amazing. Stilika asks if Lloyd's master is a white mage like him, but Lloyd never really thought to ask before he left home, so he isn't sure. But if he had to guess, then he'd say she's a combat-oriented mage with how often she caused explosions. Silica is surprised that Lloyd's master was able to teach him white magic even though she isn't a white mage, and if possible, Silica says she would like to train under Lloyd's master as well. But Lloyd immediately shuts her down and says she's much better off not meeting his master. After all the pain he had to suffer during Merlin's training, he wouldn't wish such torment on even his worst enemy. But that's not to say that he doesn't like his master. She was strict with her lessons, but she was also very kind at times, so he knows she cares about him. After their celebratory meal, Yui reminds everyone that they still need to come up with a strategy for their mission, but before that, they should probably explain the details of the quest to Lloyd. Yui pulls out the quest notice, and Dagus explains that their mission is to take care of a pack of monsters that have been tearing up farms in the area recently. The locals aren't able to drive the monsters away on their own, and apparently there are multiple different species of monsters traveling together, which is pretty much unheard of. With how strange the case is, there's no telling what might happen. But as adventurers, Yui believes it is their job to help the people who are in danger, and Lloyd agrees with her. As for their plan of attack, Yui and Dagus won't be very useful in a fight against a large mob of monsters, so they are going to have to rely on Silica's AoE magic to defeat the beasts. However, casting magic over a large area consumes a lot of mana, so Silica is worried that she won't be able to finish them all off depending on the size of the horde. Yui asks Lloyd if he can use any offensive spells, and Lloyd tells her he knows a few, but he doesn't think the spells of a white mage like him would be as good as those of a combat mage like Silica. Either way, they still need to come up with a battle plan, so Dagus suggests that he and Yui go out in front to draw the monsters' attention, and once the monsters start chasing them, he'll lead them all into one spot so Silica can deal a final blow. As for Cross, his job will be to protect Silica while she casts her spell, and Lloyd will be on healing and support magic duty. Silica is a bit excited to receive support from Lloyd since she knows his buffs are incredibly strong, but Lloyd still doesn't understand why everyone thinks so highly of him. At first, Yui thought Lloyd was just being modest, but now she realizes that he genuinely doesn't understand how strong he is, so she tells him he should be a little more confident in his skills. Lloyd reminds her that he was kicked out of the hero party for lacking power, so he can't be that great, and the group still doesn't understand what kind of idiots would call Lloyd weak, that they fully trust in his abilities, and Lloyd is happy to hear that. Once they are done with the strategy meeting, they all head outside and agree to meet up tomorrow morning so they can begin their mission. They all start walking over to the inn together, but Dagus notices that Lloyd is walking in the opposite direction, so he goes over to ask him where he's going. It's a bit embarrassing, but Lloyd admits that he doesn't have enough money to afford an inn, so he has been sleeping under the bridge since he came to the city. Dagus refuses to let his new friend sleep under a bridge, so he hands Lloyd a bag of coins and tells him to take it. Lloyd tries to turn down the offer since he doesn't want to accept free money, but Dagus tells him he should just think of this as a short-term loan, and can just pay it back once he gets his share of the reward money for the mission. Lloyd is extremely thankful, so he promises to work hard to pay off the loan, and Dagus tells him to hurry up and come to the inn already. That night, Lloyd sleeps in a bed for the first time in a while, and he is unbelievably grateful, and his teammates are such nice people. The next morning, Lloyd and the others gather outside Yui's house in preparation for the mission, and once Yui is ready, she comes out to join them. However, when she sees everyone standing there with no bags, she is confused since missions like these require a lot of luggage. The others explain that Lloyd actually helped them out and used his storage magic to hold all their bags, and they wouldn't have to carry them. Lloyd offers to do the same for Yui, and once her bag has been stored, she thanks him for the help because carrying those bags always makes traveling so difficult. Lloyd says he can teach them how to use storage magic if they want since it's not that complex, but the others had no idea it was even possible for normal people like them to do. Lloyd explains that everyone is born with at least a little bit of mana, so it should be possible to learn storage magic, although it takes a lot of practice to increase the storage capacity of your spell. But even if their storage space won't be as large as Lloyd, it'd still be useful to learn, so they ask Lloyd to teach them, and he says he'd be happy to. A little while later, they begin their journey, and while traveling through the plains, they eventually come across the border to the nation of demons. The demons have been laying low for now, so things are fairly peaceful, but who knows when they might try to conquer this continent again. Meanwhile, out in the forest, there's a cloaked man performing some clearly evil voodoo, and it's definitely going to cause some problems later on. Lloyd and the others eventually make it to their first checkpoint for the trip, and they got here a lot earlier than they expected, so they plan to set up camp near the water. Lloyd pulls all the camp gear out of his storage, and everyone begins working together to set up the tents and prepare a fireplace for nighttime. It takes a while, and by the time they are done, Yui is all sweaty from the hard work. She asks Dagus if she can go take a bath in the river now, but Dagus says there's still a lot of work to be done because Yui needs to gather the firewood for tonight's dinner. However, Lloyd says he's willing to gather the firewood for Yui, so she thanks him and grabs Silica and drags her off so they can take a bath together. A little while later, Lloyd is out in the forest collecting dry wood, and once he's got enough, he prepares to head back to camp, but just then, he hears a scream coming from the water nearby. Yui and Silica were taking a bath just like they said they would, but they weren't expecting to run into a basilisk in the water here. To make matters worse, they are both currently unarmed, so if Lloyd doesn't do something soon, then they are going to be eaten. He slides down the cliffside and launches a small fireball to get the monster's attention, and while it is distracted, he tells Yui and Silica to swim over to the shore. He then pulls their weapons out of storage and throws it to them, while simultaneously casting strengthening magic on them, and now that they are ready to fight, Yui jumps up and slices one of the basilisk's heads off in one swing. Silica then yells for Lloyd and Yui to take cover, because she's about to cast a fireball, so they both jump out of the way and Silica launches a blast that incinerates the rest of the basilisk in one hit. Silica is shocked by how much firepower she just produced since she has never been able to do that before, and Lloyd failed to mention that he cast a buff spell on her earlier, so Silica has no idea what happened. Also, at one point, Yui's towel falls off her body right in front of Lloyd, but she'd rather not talk about it. Back at camp to take her mind off it, Lloyd decides to start teaching everyone how to use storage magic, and he basically tells them they need to use their hands to open a hole in space so they can store their stuff. It's nowhere near as easy as Lloyd made it sound, but they decide to give it a try anyway. Unsurprisingly, none of them are able to make it work, and Lloyd thinks it's because he's a bad teacher, but Dagus assures him that his explanations were perfect. It's just going to take a while for them to figure it out since they are beginners. Just then, Silica comes up with the bright idea of chanting storage, and when she does, her storage space actually opens up, so the others realize the mistake they made. They had been trying to cast the spell silently, since that's what Lloyd always does, but they aren't Lloyd. They all try doing it with incantations this time, and eventually, they are all able to get their storage spaces to work, although they still need a bit of practice. Later that night, after everyone has had dinner, Lloyd is sitting by the fire when Yui comes over to talk to him. She tells Lloyd she wants to thank him for joining the party, but Lloyd says there's no need since he was looking for a party to join anyway. Yui still feels a bit guilty because she did kind of pressure him into it, but Lloyd knows she was only being pushy because she was eager to get this quest done. Speaking of which, Lloyd asks her why she is so personally invested in this quest, because he thinks it's strange when she has no connection to the area that's under attack. Yui explains that it reminds her of her hometown because when she was a child, her village was attacked by monsters. She was the sole survivor of the incident, and it left her with lifelong trauma, so she can't just stand by while the same thing happens to another village. Just then, Lloyd hears a strange sound nearby, so he tells Yui to go wake the others up because they need to move. A few moments later, a large group of average-sized spiders come marching through the forest, and at first the group manages to stay hidden to avoid a confrontation. But then Yui accidentally steps on a twig, alerting all the spiders their presence. They'd all pull out their weapons and prepare for a fight, but almost immediately, one of the spiders managed to get a hold of Silica's wand and throws it up into a tree so she won't be able to cast any more attack spells. The situation is getting serious, so Lloyd takes charge and tells everyone he has a plan. First, he casts enhancement magic on everyone to make them stronger and sends Yui out to hold the spiders off, after which he asks Cross to go retrieve Silica's staff from the tree. Once the staff is back in Silica's hands, Lloyd instructs Silica and Cross to combine their attack to finish the spiders off. Lloyd's plan worked perfectly, and he is glad that everyone is safe, but he is worried he might have stepped out of line by yelling out orders like that. Lloyd apologizes for giving out orders when he's not the leader, but none of them care about that since Lloyd is knowledgeable, so his orders were actually really helpful. And to be honest, they'd appreciate it if he took over command next time they get themselves in a situation like that. The next morning, everyone packs up their camp gear, and after storing it all away, they get ready to continue their journey. However, Lloyd is lost in thought because he can't shake the feeling that their encounter with the spiders last night wasn't a coincidence. Over the next few days, Lloyd takes it upon himself to keep watch in case anything similar happens, but the others are starting to get worried since it's not healthy for him to keep staying up so late. They offer to go back to taking rotating shifts, but Lloyd tells them he's perfectly fine like this since he's used to staying up late. After all, with how mediocre his skills are, this is the only way he feels he can contribute to the team. That's absolutely not true and everyone knows it, but even after all the time they've already spent trying to convince Lloyd that his skills are extraordinary, he remains completely oblivious, so Silica tells her to just drop the subject for now so they can get some sleep. But before they go, she begs Lloyd not to push himself too hard. The next morning, the party continues their journey, and Yui is getting concerned about how low Lloyd's confidence is. So when she sees him silently casting a spell over there, she walks over to ask what he's doing. Lloyd explains that he's just casting a simple detection spell to see if there are any monsters nearby, but there's nothing simple about that. Detection magic is so rare that Yui has never actually met anyone that was capable of using it, but to Lloyd, it's something that's not even worth mentioning. He says his detection range isn't even that large, just a few kilometers, but he thinks it would be safer if he used the detection magic periodically for the rest of the trip to make sure the area is safe. Yui agrees that using detection magic would make their journey a lot safer, but she worries that making Lloyd use something as impressive as detection magic so frequently might be a little too much of a burden for him. She asks if there's anything she can help him with, but Lloyd tells her he can handle it on his own, so her help isn't needed. Later that night, Lloyd is staying up to keep watch again, and while they are in their tent, Yui and Silica start wondering if Lloyd might not trust them or something. She knows Lloyd is very capable, but so far he has refused to rely on any of his teammates even though they are meant to be companions. Silica doesn't think it's really something to be concerned about since it's natural for people to take a while to warm up to their teammates. In fact, when the team first got together, Yui and Silica barely ever spoke to each other, but over time their bond grew stronger and they became great friends. Lloyd's case is a little different since he seems to think he's weak for some reason, so he's desperately trying to prove himself even though he doesn't need to. There's probably a reason that he acts the way he does, and she's sure that Lloyd will eventually open up to them about it if they give him enough time. Meanwhile, outside, Lloyd is still busy with the night watch when Daggers comes up to him and says he has a favor to ask. He needs Lloyd to come help him with something, and Lloyd says he'd be happy to help, but he doesn't feel comfortable abandoning his night watch post. Cross then comes up and says he can handle the watch while Lloyd is gone, so Lloyd ends up agreeing to go with Daggers. They head a little deeper into the woods and Daggers sets up a complex chime system along the trees. Lloyd asks what this is for, so Daggers explains that the chimes will alert them if any monsters approach, meaning Lloyd doesn't have to stay up all night keeping watch now. Lloyd begins to protest since he won't be able to use his detection magic while he's sleeping, so Daggers asks him if he really trusts him that little. Lloyd immediately denies it, but from the way he has been acting lately, it certainly looks like he doesn't trust the party. He always insists on scouting alone, and he refuses to let anyone else do the night watch or help him. Lloyd assures Daggers that he definitely trusts the party, but for years, Merlin has been telling him that he needs to learn to do everything independently, and the first party he joined after coming to the capital called him useless, so he thought he needed to push himself in order to be useful to them. Daggers doesn't feel like Lloyd is a burden at all, but even if he were holding the team back a little, he'd have no problem with that. The whole reason they formed the team in the first place was so they could rely on each other for help, but Lloyd had literally never even considered the idea of relying on others, so it is a massive revelation to him. Daggers wonders what kind of torture Lloyd must have been put through to end up like this, but for now he says they should just get some sleep. The two head back to the camp and Cross stands guard while Lloyd and Daggers get some shut-eye in the tent. Lloyd isn't used to the idea, but having true companions sounds nice, so he wants to give it a try. The next morning, Lloyd finds Yui and asks her if she can help fetch some water, but Yui just stands there frozen in disbelief for a moment because this is the first time Lloyd has ever asked her to help him with anything. But she is glad that Lloyd is finally relying on her, so she happily agrees to help him. Meanwhile, in a nearby castle, an evil count receives a report saying all the magic stones have been placed just like he requested. Michaels is pleased to hear this since everything is going according to plan, and thanks to the monster attacks he set up, almost all the adventurers in the capital have been dispatched on missions. Now, the only ones left there are the low-ranking adventurers and the hero party, and honestly, Michaels would have preferred it if the hero party was gone as well, but he's confident he can overwhelm them with his forces easily enough, so it won't be a problem. Back in the forest, Lloyd and the others keep moving forward, but Yui is starting to get a bad feeling about this place. It's unnaturally quiet here, and the others think it's strange that they haven't encountered a single monster since they entered this part of the forest. Yui asks Lloyd if he had anything to do with the strange absence of monsters, but Lloyd tells her the only spell he has been doing is casting detection magic, and it doesn't repel monsters at all. That means something else must be scaring the monsters away, so Lloyd increases the range of his detection magic to see if he can figure out what it is. After scanning for a few seconds, he finally spots something, so he tells everyone that there's a horde of monsters around 2.5 kilometers ahead. According to the map, that's the direction of the farm they were heading to, but before they talk about that, Yui asks Lloyd to seriously just scan everything in a 2-kilometer radius. Lloyd confirms it, and he still doesn't think it's anything special, but the others tell him that's over 10 times the distance that even the most talented mages are able to use. Lloyd had no idea 2 kilometers was so impressive, but he instinctively feels the need to downplay his accomplishment, so he tells everyone that 2 kilometers is pretty much his max, and it consumes a lot of mana, so he can't do it often. But that doesn't make it any less impressive. Yui is getting really frustrated by how dense Lloyd is when it comes to recognizing his own power, but they've got a mission to deal with right now, so they will have to knock some sense into him later. They eventually arrive at the farm, but even though they were warned about the quantity of monsters ahead of time, actually seeing it in person is terrifying. The large number of high wolves aside, Lloyd remembers the report saying that there were many different types of monsters in the horde, so he is wondering where the rest of them went. The others agree with him since they know for a fact that there should be monsters in the forest that are stronger than the wolves here, so there's no way the wolves would have come out on top if the fight broke out. Lloyd asks if Yui knows where the owner of the farm is, but she says she isn't sure. The request said something about the owner getting injured and staying with his son in the city. Just then, Cross notices something strange down in the farm, so he tells the others to take a look, but they can't see anything because their vision isn't as good as Cross's. Lloyd can't see what's down there either, so he casts enhancement magic on his eyes, and now he's able to spot the ominous stone sitting in the middle of the farm. He casts the vision buff on the others as well, and they all agree that the stone looks like bad news, but from what Lloyd can tell, he believes it might be orc magic. Merlin once told him that orc magic is capable of controlling monsters, so someone must be using that magic stone to lure them all here. To be sure, Lloyd casts his detection magic again, and just as he had expected, he discovers another massive horde of monsters heading straight for them. He wonders why someone would go to so much trouble to attract monsters, since if they were trying to eliminate the party, there would have been several easier ways to do it. Lloyd is still deep in thought over this, but Cross reminds him that they still have the second horde of monsters heading towards them, so they should probably retreat as soon as possible. Yui tells him they can't retreat because if they do, the farm will be destroyed, but Cross points out that there's no way they can handle a horde of over 1,000 monsters on their own. However, Dagus doesn't think retreating is even possible at this point, since even if they manage to escape, they might end up leading the monsters straight into the village. None of them are sure what they should do, but Lloyd says he thinks they should stay and fight because he has a plan. First, he says he's going to need to get rid of that magic stone, so he asks Cross if he thinks he can hit it from here. Cross is an amazing marksman, so he is confident that he can aim well enough to hit the stone, but it's pretty far away, so he's not sure if he will have enough power to destroy it in one shot. Lloyd says that's fine, since if power is the only issue, he can compensate for it with his enhancement magic. Cross takes aim, and just before he shoots, Lloyd casts 3 layers of enhancement magic on him at the same time, allowing the arrow to fly all the way over to the magic stone and shatter it in one go. Cross is amazed that he actually made the shot, so he asks Lloyd what he did, and Lloyd explains that he just cast enhancement magic on Cross, his bow, and his arrow at the same time to pack as much force into the shot as possible. If it wasn't already clear, that's not something people are normally able to do, but Lloyd is as oblivious as ever, so doesn't think it's something worth praising him for. Anyway, now that the magic crystal has been destroyed, all the monsters start attacking one another because they are no longer being mind-controlled, and even if they don't completely wipe each other out, Lloyd thinks this should reduce their numbers by a lot. As for the other horde, Lloyd was kind of hoping they'd stop charging once the crystal was destroyed, but he had no such luck. Everyone gets into position as they wait for the monsters to arrive, and they start losing their nerve when they see the sheer number of monsters heading their way, but Lloyd tells them they need to wait for the monsters to get closer before they attack. Just as the monsters are about to get to Silica, Lloyd gives the signal, so she immediately casts her Firestorm spell, and it's a lot more effective than she thought it would because it's literally vaporizing the monsters right before her eyes. The others know there's no way Silica's spell could do this normally, so they ask Lloyd what he did, and he tells them he just cast mana enhancement and reduced mana consumption on Silica to make her spells more efficiently. Now that the first step is complete, Lloyd runs over to Cross to prepare for the next part. He establishes a mental link with him, which is something Lloyd can apparently do by the way, and using spatial magic, he relays the locations of all the flying monsters to Cross so he can shoot them through the thick smoke. Soon enough, all the flying monsters have been dealt with, so it's time for the final phase of Lloyd's plan. He runs over to Silica and asks if she's done dealing with all the land monsters yet. She says she has killed them all, but she's almost out of mana, so there's not much she can do at this point. Lloyd tells her there's no need to worry about that and asks her to hold his hand. Silica has no idea what Lloyd is thinking, but she does as he says, and as soon as their hands are touching, Lloyd begins transferring mana into her. Silica then uses that mana to cast a spell to create storm clouds over the forest in order to put out the fires, but once that's done, she collapses because she has officially used up all of her magic. Lloyd is exhausted as well, but even though Yui and the others are praising him for basically carrying the team on his back throughout the operation, the only going through his mind is how inadequate he is for getting tired after the subjugation of 1,000 monsters. He is still relieved that they completed their quest, but something doesn't feel right here. And if his hunch is correct, then they all just got duped. The more Lloyd thinks about it, the more this whole mission looks like a carefully orchestrated trap. And if it really was a trap, then the goal must have been to lure high-ranking adventurers away from the capital city. Lloyd believes that means someone planned to compromise the city's defenses so they could attack it without much resistance, but the others remind him that the hero's party and the knights are still present in Ishtar, so it's not like the city is completely defenseless. With that said, if the warning is coming from Lloyd, they know better than to ignore it, so just to be safe, Yui suggests they should all head back to the city to make sure everything is still okay there. Lloyd agrees with her, so without saying a word, he casts Speed Boost on everyone and starts running back to town. The others see Lloyd zooming away, and they don't understand how he is moving so fast, but then they start moving just as fast as him, so they realize he must have done something. They ask him for an explanation, so Lloyd tells them he just boosted everyone's speed, so they'd be able to get back to the city quicker, and they all appreciate it, but Lloyd could stand to announce his spells a little more often so his contributions don't go unnoticed. While Lloyd and the others are racing back to the city, the Count is sitting at his desk with a glass of what I hope is red wine when General Grist comes in. Grist asks the Count how things have been going with the plan, and the Count explains that he is almost ready for the attack, and it's all thanks to that girl that Grist kidnapped because she has been extremely useful. In fact, the Count has a lot of things he wants to test out on her, and he will have all the time in the world to do that once the city of Ishtar has fallen. Grist gets the feeling that the Count is plotting something really messed up, but he decides not to question it since the Count was once the right-hand man of the Demon Lord, so his skill isn't something to be questioned. Meanwhile, the girl is locked up in the Count's dungeon, and every so often he brings her some magic potions and proceeds to harvest her magic in order to create those beast-attracting magic crystals that he has been using. And it has already happened so many times that the girl has lost the will to fight back. Back with Lloyd's group, they've just crossed a large grass field, and they are on track to make it back to the city in no time, but Silicate is starting to worry about Lloyd's health since it must be really difficult to maintain speed enhancement magic for such a long time. Lloyd doesn't know what she's talking about since once you get used to it, you can cut down the mana consumption of enhancement magic by a lot, so it barely takes a toll on him. The others ask what he means by getting used to it, so Lloyd explains that when he was younger, Merlin dropped him off in the middle of the forest and left him there until he could find his way home on his own. Of course, as a white mage, Lloyd couldn't defeat the monsters alone, so all he could do was cast support magic on himself and run away to survive. As a result, he tried all kinds of magic constantly before he finally made it home. The others are shocked by what Lloyd had to go through, but he says he's sure it's just a common training routine, so it's nothing special. Yui and Silica pause for a second after what Lloyd just said, and they are surprised they have to tell him this, but legal guardians usually don't drop their children off in the woods to fend for themselves. They try and be as clear as possible, but Lloyd somehow interprets this to mean that normal children have to go through much worse for training, and he takes that as proof that his skills must be inadequate. Once everyone is done resting, Lloyd casts the enhancement magic on them again, and they continue their run to make it back to the city, but along the way, Lloyd suddenly stops dead in his tracks, causing everyone to fall over. They all ask Lloyd why he stopped so abruptly, so he explains that he just sensed something up ahead with his scan, and he isn't sure what it is. Silica asks if it's a monster, but Lloyd doesn't think that's it. If anything, it's more like a hunter looking for his prey, but Lloyd can't be sure unless he sees it up close, so he tells the others to go on ahead without him while he checks it out. Yui immediately objects to this because Lloyd has no idea what he's walking into, and if he ends up having to fight something dangerous, he wouldn't be able to do much on his own. Lloyd admits that she's right, and everyone else chimes in saying they are all party members, so it's only natural that they investigate together, and Lloyd appreciates the fact that they care about his safety so much. Lloyd leads them all to the source of the disturbance, and now that he is closer, he can say with certainty that there are demons inside that house. When Yui hears Lloyd mention demons, she asks him if he's sure, since demons are usually only found in the Megacracy. Demons have been trying to take over this continent for ages, but right now, they should be prohibited from entering the continent's 3 major nations. The others look at Lloyd with a puzzled look on their faces because everything that was just said is common knowledge, but he's acting as if he is hearing it for the first time. Lloyd is a little embarrassed to mention this, but he admits that he doesn't have any memories from his childhood. In fact, his earliest memory is from the day Merlin took him in, and by then the war was already over. Anyway, if there really are demons here, Dagus thinks they should go report it to the City Knights as soon as possible, and Lloyd agrees, but before that, he would like to gather a little more information first. The others tell him it'd be too risky to get any closer right now, and Lloyd is aware of the dangers, but the mana he is sensing from inside that house is similar to the mana from the magic crystal that attracted all these monsters, so it stands to reason that the demons in there are connected to the mastermind behind the plot to attack the city. If that's the case, then Lloyd thinks gathering more information is worth the risk, and Yui agrees with him. So she convinces the others that it is their duty as adventurers to protect the people, and the demons most certainly pose a threat to the people. Besides, if they are lucky, they might be able to prevent the attack on Ishtar altogether if they stop the demons here, so they might as well try. However, when they walk up to the house's window and peek in, they are shocked to find out that it's completely empty. Lloyd does another scan to be sure of the location, and he figures out that the demons are underground and they look like they are up to no good, so he asks Silica if she can use earth magic because that's the only way they can get down there. Silica confirms that she can use earth magic, so Lloyd casts enhancement magic on everyone, and she uses her sand pit spell to form a hole in the ground, causing them to fall on top of the demon's ritual. The demons are all shocked and confused, so they demand to know who the intruders are, but Yui holds her sword up to one of the demons' faces and threatens to kill him if he doesn't tell them what they are up to. However, before anything happens, another demon intervenes and uses earth magic to send a bunch of rocks flying at Yui, forcing her to shift her attention long enough for the demon to escape. He runs past the demon who saved him, and shortly after, Cross shoots one of the demons in the chest, so the first one heads straight for the door, ditching all his friends and runs into the hallway while locking the door behind him so Yui can't follow. The demons that were left behind try to sneak up on her while she's busy with the door, but Cross steps in and shoots both of them in the thighs, allowing Yui to cut them down with ease. Now that all the demons in here have been taken care of, everyone regroups and prepares to go after the final demon. On the other side of the door, the demon is using magic to wrap the girl up in a cocoon so he can transport her out of here. However, Yui and the others soon come crashing through the door, so he turns on his heel and tries to flee. They all chase him up the stairs and out into the open. But at this rate, he might actually get away, so Lloyd asks Yui to run out ahead of the demon to cut him off, while he asks Silica and Daggaz to come in from the sides to box him in. Eventually, the demon is left with nowhere else to run, so Lloyd tells him to surrender already because he has a lot of questions for him. However, the demon refuses to give up, and in one final act of desperation, he casts a lightning spell in hopes of wiping out the party, but Lloyd sees it coming, so he casts magic shields over everyone to deflect it, and the last strike ends up piercing the demon through the chest, so he's done for. With the demon dead, Lloyd takes control of the cocoon and unravels it, but he is shocked to find a beast girl in there. For now, they all take her back to the cabin and put her in bed so she can rest, but with all the demons dead, they can't question them for answers, so the only one who might know something is this girl, and she doesn't look like she'll be waking up anytime soon. Daggaz asks Lloyd if he can heal her, so Lloyd says he will give it a shot, raising his staff over her body to begin the healing process. Silica is amazed by how efficient Lloyd's healing magic is, so Lloyd casually tells everyone he made a few improvements to it in his spare time. Yui wants to be as clear as possible here, so she tells Lloyd that most adventurers aren't capable of improving spells at all. In fact, it is almost unheard of for people to even tweak their spells, so what Lloyd has been doing is truly incredible. Lloyd had no idea tinkering with spells was such an extraordinary skill, since Merlin would often force him to help her refine her spells, but at least he understands Yui's point well enough to not downplay his talent this time. Soon after, the girl begins to stir in bed, and as soon as her eyes open, Yui starts bombarding her with questions because there's a lot of stuff she wants to know. The girl barely has enough time to respond to all the questions, but she manages to tell Yui that her name is Claire, so they are making progress. Lloyd decides to handle the questioning from here, so he asks Claire if she knows why she was imprisoned by the demons. Claire remains silent, so Lloyd changes topics and tells her that they are all adventurers who came here to save a farm that was being attacked by monsters. The monsters were all being summoned by a magic crystal in the middle of the farm, and Lloyd could sense beast magic coming from it. He remembers learning that some beast folk possess magic that is capable of controlling beasts, so he wants to know if the magic that was controlling the monsters came from Claire. Claire hesitates for a moment, but she eventually admits that her magic is what's powering those magic stones. Meanwhile, back in the city, a few of the guards have just stumbled upon one of the magic stones that the demons set up nearby. But it's too late to do anything about it because monsters have already begun appearing, and it won't be long before the entire city ends up being overrun. Meanwhile, back in the city, Alan is getting frustrated because he has been trying to find a replacement for Lloyd, but all the white mages who applied could barely cast 2 spells at a time when Lloyd could use 5 easily. Rena tries to tell him that Lloyd might have been a special case, but Alan refuses to believe that because his pride won't let him accept that he was wrong. Instead, he comes to the conclusion that all the white mages in the city must be even more useless than Lloyd was, so they just need to keep recruiting until they find a useful one. Just then, a member of the Imperial Guard enters the room, and he comes bearing bad news. He informs the party that monsters have been spotted outside the city, and there are over 10,000 of them, so the king would like the hero party to assist in defending the city. Alan still thinks he and his party are the strongest there is, so he agrees to the mission without giving it much thought. And seeing how laid back Alan is about the whole situation, the guard breathes a sigh of relief because he must really know what he's doing. But spoiler alert, he has absolutely no idea what he's doing. Once the guard leaves, Sheena asks Alan if he's sure about this, because 10,000 monsters is a lot for them to handle on their own, but Alan isn't worried about that. He's much more concerned about the glory he will earn once he fulfills a royal request, cementing himself as the strongest person in the entire kingdom. But just from listening to him talk, the others can already tell that this won't end well for them. Meanwhile, out in the forest, Lloyd and Claire have just located the second wave of monsters in the forest, and if these monsters were to join the one already converging on the Ishtar, there's absolutely no way the city would survive. Lloyd tells Claire they have to do something to get rid of the monsters, but she seems a little uneasy about this and asks him if there's a way for them to stop the horde without killing the monsters. Even though the demons were controlling her, there was still her power that was used to bring all these monsters here, so she feels partially responsible for them. Lloyd can tell that Claire cares about the monsters, so he promises to come up with a plan to save the town and keep monster casualties down to a minimum. But to do that, he's going to need her help, so he asks her if she can use her magic to send the monsters back to their natural habitats. Claire says it's possible, but she's not sure she can pull it off with such a large group of them in one place. Lloyd asks her if the story would be different if he uses his support magic to boost her abilities, and Claire isn't sure if it's going to work, but she's willing to give it a try. She attempts to use her magic to communicate with the monsters, but before she can activate the spell, it is interrupted by something in the forest, and she won't be able to do anything until they figure out what's causing the interference. Meanwhile, in the guild, Alan has called a meeting with all the adventurers left in the city, but he is disappointed by how weak everyone here is. Sheena tells him that all the parties that are A rank and above were sent out on missions, so the only ones left are B rank and below, which definitely isn't ideal, but you shouldn't be insulting them like this. Alan has been treating the B rank adventurers like nothing but disposable pawns, and they are starting to get really angry. But before things get too heated, the guild branch manager comes in and tells everyone to calm down. They are all here to fight the monsters, not each other, so they don't have time to be arguing like this. Alan agrees to stop disrespecting the other adventurers, and since they need a plan of attack, he stands up and announces that he wants all the mages to cast their most powerful attack spells at the start of the battle to take out 10 monsters each, and while the mages are recovering their mana, Alan and the rest of the melee fighters will rush in to buy some time. He intends to repeat the cycle as many times as necessary until all the monsters have been defeated, and in theory, it's not a bad strategy, but the adventurers tell Alan that they don't have the firepower to pull that off. At best, their strongest spells would only be enough to take one monster down, so there's no way they'd be able to kill 10 monsters each. Alan begins calling all of them incompetent, but then Mia speaks up and says she wouldn't be able to pull it off either. Alan asks what she's talking about, so she explains that a while ago her spell potency suddenly dropped and she hasn't been able to use magic as efficiently since. And it's not just her either. Sheena, Lulu, and Rena have all noticed a considerable dip in their power, and it all started the day after Lloyd left their party. Alan accuses them all of lying to him about their skills, but Rena tells him no one ever lied to him. In fact, the same thing should be happening to him as well, and if he were even partially dedicated to his training, he might have figured out that he has gotten weaker by now, but he was too busy basking in the glory of being a hero. She flat out tells him he doesn't deserve his title, and all this was said in front of all the low-ranked adventurers, so Alan gets embarrassed and tries to prove his strength by punching Rena with full force. However, she effortlessly stops his punch with her palm, and if that were me, I'm hanging up my sword and becoming a farmer right then because I'm clearly not cut out for this. And the whole guild saw it too, so there's no way Alan's reputation is ever going to recover, especially after he just spent the last half hour calling everyone here weak. He runs out of the guild in embarrassment, and the adventurers are all left wondering how someone like him ever became a hero in the first place. They clearly can't rely on him to save them, so they all start wondering what they should do because it won't be long before the monsters begin their attack. They are starting to consider abandoning the city, but Rena tells everyone to calm down because she is still willing to stay and fight. The adventurers all feel reassured that someone as competent as Rena is still on their side, but Rena can't deny that the situation is really bad, so as the first order of business, she asks everyone if they have seen a man named Lloyd recently. While Rena is busy looking for him, Lloyd is still out in the forest with Claire, and they just located a magic crystal hidden in the woods. This thing is the same as the other ones Lloyd has seen so far, and the dark energy coming off it is probably what's interfering with Claire's spell, so unless they destroy it, she won't be able to regain control over the monsters. However, that's a lot easier said than done since there are bound to be at least a dozen of these scattered all throughout the forest, and finding them is going to be very difficult. Lloyd agrees that searching the whole forest will take forever, so he asks Claire if she can sense the location of the crystals since they are using her power. She confirms that she can feel the crystal's energy as long as she's close enough, but the forest is too big for her to effectively sense any of the crystal's locations. Lloyd tells her that won't be a problem because he has the perfect plan in mind, and before Claire even gets a chance to ask any questions, Lloyd has already cast sensory sharing and enhancement on her, so she can now sense all the magic crystals in the forest, and the exact locations of those crystals are directly relayed into Lloyd's mind. He then casts invisibility magic on both himself and Claire so they can move through the forest without being detected by the monsters, and Claire is left speechless because he just did all of that without breaking a single sweat. Anyway, the two of them manage to sneak past the monsters, and Claire begins dispelling the dark magic in the crystals, while over in the city, all the adventurers have gathered outside the walls and are preparing for battle, but they are all still pretty worried. Earlier, Rena explained to them all that the person behind the success of the hero party was Lloyd, and he's the only reason they were able to come this far. If he was truly so important, the other adventurers ask her why Lloyd was kicked out of the heroes' party, and she admits that it was because of their short-sightedness. The title of heroes got to their heads, so when they performed well in battle, they always assumed it was due to their own strength, completely ignoring the effort Lloyd put into supporting the team. She tells them that their only hope is to ask Lloyd for help, but the guild manager tells her that Lloyd isn't in the city right now. A while after he was kicked out of the hero party, he joined an S-rank party and went out on a monster subjugation mission. The journey to get there would take several days for a normal person, but Rena correctly surmises that Lloyd would be able to speed up the travel time with his support magic, so if they are lucky, then he might be on his way back right now. They don't really have any other options right now, so Rena tells everyone that they are going to be betting it all on Lloyd making it back in time to save them. They all trust Rena's judgment, but they can't shake the impending sense of doom they get when they see what they are up against. Rena's plan involves the archers firing the first round of shots to thin out the herd, and once the monsters enter the trenches they dug out, the shield bearers will all line up to keep them at bay while the mage squad hits them with all the magic they got. Keeping this up isn't going to be easy, but with this strategy, they should be able to hold their ground until Lloyd and his party make it back. Later that night, Yui and the others are closing in on Ishtar, and thankfully, Lloyd's speed boost is still in effect, so they should be able to continue running after a little break. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Claire have just found the final magic stone hidden in the forest, and once they disable it, all the monsters finally go back to normal. Unfortunately, the monsters in the area right now happen to be high wolves and blood panthers, and these two groups have evolutionary beef, so the second they go back to normal, they start fighting each other. In the middle of the conflict, one of the monsters bumps into Claire, and the sudden disturbance dispels the invisibility magic that Lloyd had cast on her, so the monsters all turn their attention to her. Claire is so paralyzed by fear that she forgets that her power literally allows her to control monsters, so she's about to be eaten alive, but fortunately, Lloyd comes to the rescue and draws the attention of all the monsters to save her. The situation back in the city isn't much better because even though they've managed to hold the monsters off so far, they've been at this for hours now, and the people are starting to get exhausted, so the monsters are slowly breaking through their formation. They won't last much longer at this rate, but just when things were starting to look hopeless, a massive fireball is shot across the battlefield as Yui and the others finally arrive. Meanwhile, on Lloyd's end, he has been doing his best to evade the monsters' attacks, but this is pretty much all he can do given the circumstances. Claire is amazed by how quickly Lloyd is able to move, but she doesn't know why he isn't attacking the monsters because she's certain that someone as powerful as him would be able to defeat monsters like this. She then remembers that Lloyd promised to keep monster casualties to a minimum for her sake, which is probably why he refuses to attack the monsters. She doesn't want to let Lloyd suffer because of her, so she starts using her powers and sings a song that gets all the monsters to calm down and walk back into the forest. Lloyd wishes she had done that earlier, but he is still impressed, so he asks Claire what she did. She tells him that she just used her powers to politely ask the monsters to go back into the forest, and they listened to her. Anyway, now that the monsters in the area have been released from the mind control, Lloyd tells Claire that they need to hurry back to Ishtar, and over in Ishtar, the battle against the monsters is still as intense as ever. Even with the help of Yui's party, they still haven't made much of a dent in the horde, and they are running out of weapons and mana, so it looks like this really is the end. Rena urges everyone not to give up because she's sure they'll find a way to win eventually, but the front lines have already been breached and people are being injured left and right. They managed to hold out until morning, but by then, all their defenses have been completely destroyed, so the guild manager fears this might be the end of the city of Ishtar. However, before the city could be overrun, they all hear the voice of someone singing from the cliff near the forest, and the one behind it is Claire, whose song is being boosted by Lloyd's magic. Thanks to their efforts, all the monsters in the area stop attacking and start walking back into the forest, so the city is no longer being overrun. Once all the monsters are gone, Claire finally stops singing and she nearly faints from exhaustion, but Lloyd helps hold her steady. They are both glad that they were able to stop the monsters from destroying the city, but that doesn't mean the crisis is resolved because this whole thing was orchestrated by the demons, and they had more than one planned attack, so there's now a horde of golems heading for the city. Meanwhile, Count Michael is chilling in his castle, confident that by now the city of Ishtar must have been completely trampled by monsters. However, one of his messengers suddenly comes into his office with an urgent report. At first, Michael thinks the report is to tell him that Ishtar has been claimed, but to Michael's dismay, the messenger informs him that the monsters suddenly halted their attack and scattered back into the forest. All except the golem, who couldn't hear Claire's song for some reason. Lloyd assumes the demons must be interfering somehow, but at this rate, the golems are going to do a lot of damage, so Lloyd casts his speed boost on Claire and tells her they need to run to town quickly. As they make their way past the golems, they get spotted, so Lloyd tells Claire to fall back so they can avoid the golems' punch. After taking a quick look at the golems, it's clear to Lloyd that these ones have been enhanced somehow, so defeating them isn't going to be easy. He and Claire are coming up on the trench around the city, so he grabs Claire by the waist and leaps over the trench. All the soldiers present are stunned because jumping that far while carrying someone isn't normal, but then again, they get here that Lloyd has insane enhancement magic. Once Lloyd and Claire are on the other side of the trench, he meets up with Yui and the others, and they all thank him for everything he did to save the city. Lloyd tells them they should be thanking Claire because it's her magic that got most of the monsters to leave, but the golems are still on their way here, so they need to prepare. However, just then, Lloyd's knees give out and he falls to the ground because he has been using enhancement magic almost non-stop for the past few days, and even for him, that's way too much to handle. The others tell Lloyd that he should rest because he's overexerting himself, but he says he can't rest until the city is safe. A few moments later, the guildmaster shows up, and since he's here, Lloyd asks him to take care of Claire in the meantime, as her safety is very important to him. The manager understands, so he puts some of the knights in charge of protecting her and swears to Lloyd that she will be safe. But that aside, he is overjoyed that Lloyd made it back in time because he's their only hope now. Lloyd is confused when he hears that because he thought the hero party was still in town, but then Rena shows up and tells him that Alan refused to join the fight. Lloyd can't believe it because what kind of hero would abandon his duties when lives are at stake? But Rena tells him that someone like Alan doesn't deserve the title hero. Just then, Lloyd notices the wound on Rena's arm, and it looks pretty bad, so he doesn't think twice about using his magic to heal her. The guildmaster is amazed that Lloyd was able to heal Rena so easily, but he nearly faints as a result because he's already running low on mana. Rena tells him he didn't need to push himself so hard just to heal her, but he says he couldn't leave her with an injury like that. Rena has been meaning to apologize for not appreciating everything Lloyd has done for her, because he is the reason the hero's party became strong in the first place. Lloyd is still in denial, so he tells her he's not that strong, but Rena insists that his support was invaluable to the team, yet no one ever gave him credit for what he did. And she's just as bad because she didn't stop Alan from kicking Lloyd out, so she wants to formally apologize to him. Just then, the guards ring the alarm bells because the golems have arrived, and even though a few fall into the trench, there are still a lot left standing, so the guards lunge forward to strike them down as soon as possible. Lloyd tries telling them to wait because these golems are normal, but it's already too late. The guard's sword shatters as soon as it touches the golem, and while he's standing there in disbelief, the golem proceeds to lay him out with a right hook. This could get really bad, so Rena grabs her shield and tells everyone to attack at full force, but all the magic and ranged weapons practically bounce off the golem's rough exterior, so they are forced to back away, and everyone is starting to lose their nerve. If they don't do something soon, the city might end up getting destroyed anyway, so Lloyd tells Yui that he's going to cast enhancement magic on everyone here. Yui asks Lloyd if he is sure he can handle it since casting enhancement magic on over 100 people sounds absolutely ludicrous, but he says he will be fine. However, in his current state, he will only be able to cast the enhancements on one group at a time instead of all at once. Lloyd begins casting his spell, and once he is done, he loses strength in his legs because he's running dangerously low on mana. He tells the others he just finished casting strength boost on all the front lines and mana boost on all the mages. He also used enhancement magic on the 4 of them too, but they have to hurry because he's not sure how long the effects will last with him like this. Yui understands, so as the golems continue their approach, she gets on top of one of the towers and yells out to everyone on the battlefield, telling them that Lloyd has just cast enhancement magic on all of them, so he should be able to fight the golems now. Understandably, the soldiers find it hard to believe that Lloyd really cast magic on all of them so quickly, so they are hesitant to act, but when one of them is about to be crushed by a golem, Rena runs in and blocks the hit, after which Yui jumps down from the tower and slices the golem in half. With the first golem defeated, Rena raises her shield and tells everyone that this is proof that Lloyd's enhancement magic is effective, and now that everyone has seen proof, they realize that they do feel a lot stronger than they did a moment ago, so with Lloyd's help, they might be able to win after all. Meanwhile, Lloyd asks Cross to go assist the magic unit in the rear while Daggers and Silica should head to the front lines as soon as possible. As for Lloyd, he's on the verge of collapse, so one of the guards runs up to help him stand and leads him to the fort so he can rest. Thanks to the boost from Lloyd's magic, adventurers are now tearing through the golems one after another, and Lloyd is cheering them on from one of the towers. But just as they are about to defeat the final golem, the enhancement magic suddenly wears off, so the adventurers are once again powerless against it. It may just be a single golem, but if none of their attacks are able to stop it, then if it makes it into the city, it will wreak havoc. Yui runs out in front of it to block its path, and just as it's about to strike, Rena pushes her out of the way so Daggers can block the punch. However, they won't be able to stall it for much longer like this, so Lloyd knows he needs to do something to help. His mana reserves are almost completely dry by this point, but he somehow manages to scrape together enough energy to enhance Yui's sword. Yui realizes what Lloyd did, so she asks Daggers and Rina to cover her for a moment. The two of them raise their shields as Yui grabs her sword, and just as they block the golem's punch, Yui seizes the opportunity to run up its arm and slice its head off. With that, the city of Ishtar has been saved, and Lloyd breathes a sigh of relief because he can finally rest now. Over in Michael's castle, the general barges in because he just found out that the beast girl they captured for their plan has escaped, and he wants an explanation. However, once Michael realized that the attack had failed, he knew the general would be upset, so he packed his bags and dipped. The general flies into a rage over this, and after he's done trashing Michael's office, he decides that he's going to kill the person who interfered with his plans. Meanwhile, back in the city, Lloyd wakes up in an inn, and shortly after, Yui comes to check on him. She's glad to see that he's awake since he was so exhausted that he has been asleep for a whole day. The first thing Lloyd does is apologize because he blames himself for not being strong enough, but Yui is getting sick of how much Lloyd undervalues himself, so she tells him to come with her because there's something he needs to see. She leads Lloyd to the front door, and when she opens it, Lloyd sees a huge crowd of people gathered outside waiting for him. He freaks out and closes the door because he's never had such a large crowd called his name before, so Yui tells him they are just here because they want to thank their savior, and it's rude to slam the door in their faces, so he should go out and greet them properly. However, by the time she opens the door again, Lloyd has already jumped out a window, and he is currently circling the block to avoid the crowd. Meanwhile, back over at Merlin's house, Will goes to pay her a visit, but just as he is about to open the door, a huge explosion goes off. Merlin then comes out and Will tells her that an explosion is no way to welcome a guest, but in her defense, she thought he was an intruder. Will doesn't mind since he didn't actually get hit, and Merlin is still impressed by how Will always manages to walk away unharmed from her spells. As he enters, Will finds Thor and Lily, two of his and Merlin's former teammates from their time as heroes, and it has been ages since they were all gathered like this. Merlin asks Will if he has any new information on how Lloyd is doing, so he tells her that Lloyd was actually kicked out of the hero a while ago. Merlin is shocked to hear that, and she doesn't understand why the hero party wouldn't want Lloyd as part of their team, but Will tells her there's no need to worry since Lloyd is now part of an S-ranked team, so he's doing alright. Merlin is relieved to hear that, but there's something else Will wants to tell her, because even though he has never actually spoken to Lloyd, he has watched him long enough to know that Merlin must have had some terrible parenting methods. Back in the city, Lloyd is watching from the top of one of the buildings as tons of people flood the streets looking for him, and he still doesn't understand what's going on. Just then, his friends find him up here, and he asks them why so many people are after him. So they tell them that the people just want to show their gratitude for what Lloyd did to save the town. However, Lloyd doesn't think he deserves any gratitude because to him, what he did was the bare minimum for assistance, but Yui tells him he's looking down on himself again. He constantly seems to be setting unrealistic expectations and torturing himself for no reason. So they all tell him he could stand to have a little more confidence in himself, and for the first time, Lloyd actually seems to understand what they mean. Over at Merlin's house, Will tells her that Lloyd is way too humble for his own good, and he has no understanding of how strong he really is, so it's a miracle that he found a team who wouldn't take advantage of him. Merlin realizes she might have messed up with how she trained Lloyd, but she just didn't want him to repeat the same mistakes she made. Meanwhile, in the city, Lloyd finally agrees to go meet the crowd, and everyone begins thanking him for empowering them in the battle. So as far as they are concerned, Lloyd is the new hero of Ishtar, and as for Alan, he and the others are in deep trouble now. I'm not sure what he was thinking, but refusing to help without a reason during a crisis will automatically strip him of his hero title, so his high status is gone. And his ego refuses to let him stay in a town where Lloyd is the hero, so he tells everyone to pack their bags so they leave as soon as possible, and the girls all reluctantly follow him. The following day, Lloyd and the others are summoned to the Lord's castle, and when they arrive, they are all surprised to find Claire waiting there as well. Yui asks her if she was summoned by the Lord as well, but a few moments later, the Lord shows up and he explains that Claire is actually an honored guest here. They all sit down, and Lord Abel informs them all that Claire is actually the third princess of the Forest Empire, so she's rather important. Lloyd and the others had no idea that Claire was royalty, so this comes as a major shock to them. But that aside, Abel asks them what they think of Claire's power after seeing what it can do firsthand. Lloyd tells him that it is certainly amazing, but it is also terrifying because in the wrong hands, it could cause so much chaos. Which is exactly why Abel says they can't let her fall into the hands of the demons again. The Empire is going to want to retrieve its princess soon, so Abel has a special mission for Yui's party. He says he wants them to escort Claire to the royal capital, Sylphis, and normally, this would be a job for the royal knights, but that would draw too much attention and Abel doesn't want to risk alerting the demons to Claire's presence. It's clear that the demons crave Claire's power, and Lloyd is certain that they won't give up so easily, so he and the rest of the team agree to escort her to the capital, and the following morning, they set out on their journey. 10 days go by and the group is still on their way to the capital, and Yui is starting to wonder how much farther they have to go. Daga says they should be arriving at a town soon, so they can rest once they get there, and that town happens to specialize in hot springs, so Yui asks Claire if she wants to visit one once they get there. Claire says she has never actually gotten to experience a hot spring before, and Yui screams in shock because Claire has been missing out big time. Meanwhile, the others lay under a tree and talk about how friendly Yui has been with Claire since the trip began. Part of it is the fact that Yui is just a friendly person, but it also helps keep the tension down since it's nerve-wracking to be reminded that they are technically on the run from demons. The group eventually arrives at the town, so the first thing they do is head to follow Yui's suggestion and head to a hot spring. Yui and Silica waste no time soaking in the bath, and they hardly pay any attention to how odd it is that there are no other patrons around. Claire, on the other hand, is too nervous to take off her towel since she's not used to bathing with other people, and it's a little embarrassing. Silica and Yui understand how she feels, but they tell her it's nothing to be embarrassed about since they are all girls here. Claire eventually gives in and agrees to get in the bath with them, but only on the condition that they don't stare at her too much. A few minutes later, Yui is staring straight at Claire's body, and just as Claire is starting to think she's being weird, Yui compliments her on her slim figure. She says it's fitting for a princess, but Claire is still insecure because she doesn't have mounds anywhere as large as Silica's. Yui's chest is also pretty big, but Silica says that's just because Yui got fat over the past few weeks. Yui gets up to argue, but then she remembers all the desserts and meat she has been eating lately, and it becomes clear that Silica was right, but Yui still doesn't like the fact that she's being laughed at. And while Yui and Silica are busy arguing about their chest sizes, Dagastros and Lloyd all wash each other's backs on the other side of the wall, hearing every single word. Dagas and Cross are doing their best to block out the impure thoughts, but Lloyd has something else on his mind right now. Since the demons want to recapture Claire, they are definitely going to make a move to get to her. It's unlikely that the demons will be capable of launching a full-scale attack within the kingdom, but a smaller elite unit is much more plausible, so Lloyd needs to develop some countermeasures. The original plan was for the group to stay in town for one night and get back on the road tomorrow morning, but Lloyd calls a meeting and tells everyone that he'd like to spend the next few days in this town because there are a few preparations he needs to make. Dagas says he also wants to stay in town since he was planning to upgrade his gear, and Silica says she could use the time to experiment with her magic a little, so she's on board as well. As for Cross, he doesn't really care what Yui decides since he's fine either way, but with the majority of the group wanting to stay in town, Yui agrees to put a hold on their departure for a few days so everyone can make preparations. The next morning, Dagas heads out to take a look at the various weapon stores in the area, but even though he has been searching all morning, he hasn't found what he's looking for yet. As he is walking down the street, he spots Yui and Claire down by a boat, and they seem like they are on their way to go sightseeing. Yui asks him what he's doing, so Dagas explains that he has been meaning to get a new shield since the one he uses now is getting pretty old, but he hasn't had much luck finding a replacement, and he has already checked all the weapon shops in the city. Claire says she recalls seeing a weapon store in one of the back alleys, but the place did look pretty worn down, so she's not sure if Dagas will be able to find what he's looking for there. He makes his way to the store, but once he gets inside, he finds no one inside. He wonders if this place is abandoned, but then he notices all the high-quality weapons hanging on the wall, so he is sure he's in the right place. Just then, the owner comes out, and he initially starts yelling because he thinks Dagas is one of the hooligans who like to cause trouble in his store, but Dagas has no idea what he's talking about and tells him that he just came here because he wants to take a look around, so the old man apologizes for the misunderstanding and lets him continue browsing. While Dagas is taking a look at the shield selection, a group of guys walk into the store and their leader, Karen, starts yelling for the old man to get out here. Just then, Karen notices Dagas over there and he's surprised to see that this place actually has a customer, so he obnoxiously yells over at him and asks if he's really here to shop. Dagas has no idea what these guys are up to, but he confirms that he's here because he wants to buy a weapon. And as soon as he says that, the guys all burst out in laughter. They assume Dagas must be a low-ranked adventurer if he's shopping at this rundown place, but just then, the owner comes out and he looks pissed. Karen smugly smiles at the owner and asks how business has been treating lately, but he already knows the answer to that because he has been making sure to interfere with the man's business every chance he gets. From what Dagas has heard, he realizes that Karen and his gang must be harassing the old man, so he steps in, but Karen's buddies tell him he had better mind his own business because Karen over here is an A rank, and there's no one in town who's stronger than him. At least that would be the case if an S-rank shield bearer wasn't standing right in front of him. However, Karen has no idea about Dagas' rank, so he continues to praise himself for being A rank. Dagas asks what an A-rank adventurer like him is doing harassing an old man. So Karen explains that he has been trying to get the man to sell him an artifact, but every time he comes here, the man turns him down because he says Karen isn't worthy. He doesn't want to sell that artifact to someone who wouldn't be able to bring out its full potential, but Karen isn't taking no for an answer, so he says he'll just beat the old man up until he hands it over. As soon as Karen says that, Dagas steps in and calls him a disgrace to all adventurers for even thinking about doing something like that. One of Karen's friends gets mad and throws a punch at Dagas, but that shit was weak, so Dagas grabs his arm and twists it behind his back. He then pulls his shield out of storage and rams the entire group out of the store, leaving Karen incredibly confused because he thought Dagas was just some random low-ranked adventurer. but Daggett calmly pulls out his adventurer's ID and informs them that he's S rank. He would have mentioned it earlier, but he thinks bragging about your rank is lame, so he didn't want to stoop down to their level. After everything that just happened, the old man has made up his mind, so he gets Daggett's attention and says he has a favor he'd like to ask of him. Meanwhile, back at the inn, Lloyd is busy working on his magic when Yui and Claire get back from their sightseeing. Yui asks him what he's doing, so he tells her he's trying to improve on his support spells, although he is also considering learning some new magic as well, but he's not sure what to try. Yui suggests that Lloyd should learn some attack spells, and he says he could do that, but he doesn't think it'd do much good since he's sure Silica's attack spells are better than anything he could do, and for once, Yui can understand why Lloyd would feel inferior since it's nearly impossible to find a mage as powerful as Silica, so her magic is no joke. Meanwhile, Silica is out in the forest training her magic. During the last battle, if Lloyd and Claire hadn't shown up when they did, then she is certain that they would have died. She can't keep relying on Lloyd to save the day, so she wants to get stronger, and to do that, she's going to have to upgrade her spells. She spends the next few hours working on a high-level fire spell, but so far, she hasn't been able to get it to work without it exploding in her face. However, she refuses to give up because this is all part of the learning process. Back at the inn, Lloyd and the others are having some tea, and Yui tells him that it's not a stretch to say that Silica is a genius when it comes to magic, but her raw talent for magic isn't what makes her special, it's the fact that she won't quit until she masters a spell, no matter how hard it is or how long it takes. And that resilience is being showcased right now because Silica is still hard at work training her new spell, and she's finally starting to make progress because it didn't blow up in her face this time. She is excited that she finally managed to maintain control over the spell, but she might have gotten a little too excited because she ends up slipping off the rock she was standing on, and once her footing is lost, her control over the spell crumbles as well, so a huge explosion goes off in the forest. Fortunately, Silica managed to survive the blast mostly unharmed, and she's glad she didn't accidentally start a forest fire, but she can't believe she made such a silly mistake. Whenever she's in public, she always makes sure to keep track of her surroundings, but when she's alone, she tends to let her guard down too much. Her clothes are pretty much ruined now, so she thinks she should end her training here and head home for the day. However, a moment later, she hears something rustling in the bushes, and the first thought that goes through her head is that it might be a monster, in which case she's screwed because she pretty much already used up her magic reserves, but fortunately, it turns out to be Daggus. They are both surprised to see each other, so Silica asks Daggus what he's doing out here. It's kind of a long story. When the old man said he had a favor to ask, he proceeded to show Daggus a great shield forged by one of the best blacksmiths in Rylands. This shield is known as Aegis, and Curran was trying to get his hands on it because it is able to block any attack and is practically indestructible. Daggus could tell at a glance that the shield was special, but the old man tells him it's very heavy, so most adventurers wouldn't be able to wield it properly. That's why he refused to let Karen buy it, because he couldn't bear to see such a work of art go to waste in the hands of an incapable adventurer. Plus, Karen was really annoying, so he wouldn't have sold it to him even if he was strong enough to use it. However, it's a different story with Daggus, so the old man says he's willing to just give the shield to him. Daggus is surprised and asks if it's really okay for the man to give away such a valuable shield, and the man says it's fine, but he does have one condition. Since earlier this morning, people have been hearing strange explosions in the forest, and they are all too scared to go check it out, so the man wanted Daggus to investigate in exchange for the shield. Silica knew the explosions were loud, but she had no idea her training was scaring the townspeople so much. However, Daggus points to the giant crater in the ground and tells her it's hard not to be scared when spells capable of that much damage are being thrown around. After that, Daggus takes Silica to the old man, and she apologizes profusely for all the trouble she caused. The man says it's alright since Silica did fix the crater she created, so there was no harm done. He tells Daggus he can take the shield now, but he doesn't think he actually earned it since his friend was the one behind the disturbance in the first place. However, the man still wants him to have it anyway because he respects Daggus as an adventurer. After returning home, Silica and Daggus tell the others all about what happened today, and Daggus shows them the shield he was given. They are all impressed that he managed to acquire a legendary shield and amazed that Silica has already mastered a new spell. Yui then asks her to demonstrate it later. Seeing Daggus and Silica improve their capabilities so much in one day makes Lloyd want to grow even stronger to keep up with them, and Cross is feeling a bit left out since he didn't do much today. Yui tells them there's no point in rushing since she's sure they'll all continue to grow stronger, but in the meantime, she says it's time to get some food, so she drags Claire off so they can go to a restaurant together. The next morning, Cross takes a walk through town, and he's putting some serious thought into what he can do to get stronger. He can't let himself fall behind the others in strength, but getting a new weapon or training in the woods wouldn't make much of a difference for him, so he's not sure what to do. Just then, a young boy happens to bump into Cross, and he apologizes for the mistake, but Cross tells him not to worry about it since it's not a big deal. He notices that the boy has an adventurer tag around his neck, so he asks him if he's registered with the guild. The boy confirms it, and when he finds out that Cross is also an adventurer, he says he has a request and asks Cross to join his party. Normally, Cross would have turned him down, but the boy looked so desperate that he couldn't bring himself to say no. Besides, he's got some time to spare, so he might as well go along with it. The boy's name is Lin, and he brings Cross over to the town's Adventurers Guild so they can get started. Cross notices that Lin is carrying a bow and arrows, so he must be an archer as well, but that makes him wonder why Lin has been going around without a party when archers aren't suited for solo adventuring. However, it's not long before everyone in the guild recognizes Lin and starts talking about how sorry they feel for Cross since the boy will do nothing but drag him down. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that Lin is a walking disaster when it comes to using a bow, so no one wants anything to do with him, and Lin apologizes for not mentioning it earlier. He reveals that he is actually E rank, and he understands if Cross doesn't want to help a loser like him anymore. Cross says he's not leaving. To make Lin feel better, he tells him that he's also trying to find a way to grow stronger. So Lin assumes that means Cross must be low-ranked just like him and cheers up because that makes them low-ranked brothers. Cross decides it's not worth correcting Lin's misunderstanding, so he says they should start by looking for a quest on the notice board. While Cross is busy with Lin, Yui is out in town looking for a great dessert shop she heard about earlier, but she's starting to get worried about gaining weight from all the food she's been eating lately. Just then, Yui hears a commotion to her right, so she turns and sees a pompous noblewoman yelling at a boy for getting mud on her dress. The boy is terrified and apologizes for the mistake, but it isn't about the dress anymore. The noblewoman just wanted an excuse to make him a victim. She orders her guards to take the boy's life, and look at the smile on that man's face. He's been waiting for a reason to kill someone for ages now. The townspeople all know this isn't right, and they want to help, but that woman is the heir to House Windy, and if they did anything to stop her now, they'd just end up as her next victim. A soldier raises his sword, and he is about to cut the boy to pieces, but all of a sudden, Yui yells for him to stop. The woman is outraged and demands to know who would dare to interfere with the orders of someone as powerful as her. Yui has absolutely no clue who this woman is, and she couldn't give a damn either. All she knows is that she's looking at a ratchety, big-back old hag who gets off on bullying the weak, and she won't stand for it. The woman gets flustered and orders her men to kill Yui first, so all of them charge without hesitation. Yui tells the boy to hurry up and get out of here while he has the chance, and as the guards strike, she pulls her sword out of storage to defend herself. The men are all confused because they could have sworn that Yui didn't have a sword a moment ago, and normally seeing something like that would be enough for me to reevaluate whether I really want to be fighting this person, but the woman orders them to keep fighting, so they do as they are told. Meanwhile, Cross and Lin are out on their first quest, and their goal is to kill these red slimes. Cross thinks a mission like this should be easy enough to complete even with Lin's abysmal skill, so he pulls his bow out of storage and gets ready to fire. However, he forgot that he's pretending to be a low-rank adventurer right now, so after Lin saw him use storage, he had to make up an excuse and said it's just a basic spell one of his friends taught him. Anyway, it's time to take care of the slimes, so Cross takes aim and fires a few arrows straight through the cores of 3 slimes. Lin thinks Cross is amazing, but Cross tells him he can't just sit there and watch, so he should try shooting a few slimes as well. Lin agrees, so he gives it his best shot and launches a few arrows at the slimes, but he has aimed worse than my ranked teammates, so training him is going to take forever. Back in town, Yui is still fighting the guards, and the woman doesn't understand why her men are having so much trouble handling a single girl. The people in the crowd eventually recognize Yui as the famous sword prodigy who attained S rank at the young age of 16. Knowing who she really is, the people understand why the guards haven't been able to beat her, and to be honest, she's probably taking it easy on them, so she doesn't accidentally kill anyone. Yui asks the noblewoman if she's ready to give up yet, but she still has one trick up her sleeve, so she gives the signal for the mage hiding in the crowd to cast the spell. All of a sudden, a magic circle appears beneath Yui's feet, and a moment later she is bound in place by several magic chains. These chains will slowly drain Yui's mana until she's unable to move, so there's no way for her to fight back now. The noblewoman then orders the guards to finish Yui off once and for all, but all the commotion seems to have attracted the attention of a woman who is passing by, so she comes down to see what's going on. She knows it's not her place to tell people not to fight, but 4-on-1 seems a little unfair, so she decides to even the playing field a little. The woman looks like she only took a single step, but in the next moment, all of the noblewoman's guards pass out. Yui is the only one whose eyes could actually keep up with what happened, because in that split second, the woman dashed behind all the guards and came back to her original position. She was so fast that she probably could have stopped for coffee along the way, and no one would have noticed. And while Yui generally avoids killing people, this woman has no problem taking a head or 2 home with her as a souvenir, so when she threatens the noblewoman, she passes out in fear. Now that the battle is over, Yui thanks the woman for saving her, but she also has a favor she'd like to ask. She thinks the woman's speed is incredible, so she wants to know how she can become as strong as her. The woman tells Yui that she's already incredibly strong for her age, so there's no need to rush things, but Yui says she has her reasons. She explains that she has a white mage named Lloyd in her party, and he is truly incredible, so she wants to get stronger to make sure she's not a burden on him. The woman is surprised to hear Lloyd's name mentioned, but then she realizes that Yui must be the leader of the party that Merlin mentioned. The woman turns out to be one of the former members of Merlin's party, and she's officially interested in Yui, so she agrees to train her a little. Meanwhile, back at the inn, Lloyd has been racking his brain non-stop trying to optimize his spells, and the others are starting to get worried about him. They suggest he should take a break since holding himself up like this isn't good for him, and Claire offers to go on a walk around town with him. As for Yui, she's currently out in the woods with the woman, and the woman finds it a little concerning that Yui just followed a random stranger out into the woods without hesitation. Yui says it's fine since she knows the woman isn't a bad person, but she would like to know her name though. The woman is a little hesitant since she doesn't want to reveal her true identity, so she ends up giving Yui a fake name and says she is called Lilith. The long pause just now made Lilith seem even more suspicious than before, but Yui is still fairly certain that she's a good person, so she's going to try and learn as much as she can from her. Speaking of learning, Cross is currently trying to teach Lin how to use his bow properly. After getting a few pointers, Lin actually manages to graze one of the slimes, and this is great progress, so Cross asks him to try aiming for the core next time. Lin says he understands, so he pulls his bow back again, and this time he actually manages to destroy the slime's core. Cross is amazed because he honestly thought Lin was hopeless at first, but he's a surprisingly quick learner. As for Yui's training, Lilith says her first lesson will be to cut down that tree over there. That seems easy enough, but then Lilith adds that Yui has to do it from this spot without moving her feet. She thinks Lilith must be joking because something like that isn't possible, but Lilith proceeds to demonstrate the technique and fell the tree in one slash. She explains that you just need to coat your sword in mana and swing as hard as you can, and it'll work out, so Yui is eager to give it a try. Meanwhile, Lloyd and Claire are out having a snack while they soak their feet in the hot spring. Lloyd is glad he got a chance to take a break from all his magic research, but speaking of magic, there's something he's been meaning to ask Claire. He has had his suspicions for a while now, but first, he wants to confirm whether the magic she used to control the monsters was ancient magic or not. Claire freezes up a bit since she wasn't expecting Lloyd to find out about that, but she does admit that it is indeed ancient magic. That's pretty much what Lloyd expected since magic as impressive as that couldn't have been developed in the modern era, but that leads into his second question, so he asks her if it would be possible for him to learn how to use the magic as well since it might help him with his magic research. But Claire tells him he can't. An ancient magic user is said to only appear once every few centuries when a suitable child is born, and anyone who attempts to use it without having the innate talent faces severe backlash. There are even records of a man who used ancient magic to save a village and lost his life as a result, so Claire tells Lloyd that he can't go messing around with it. Back with Cross and Lin, they finally managed to clear out all the slimes, so their job here is done. This would have been done a lot sooner if Cross could reload his bow instantly, but that's just one of the natural limitations of being an archer. Anyway, he tells Lin they should go down to retrieve the slime material, but just then, Lin spots a giant spider. That thing is a high-level monster, so Lin says they should get out of here. But at this rate, the spider is going to eat all the slime material that they worked so hard to collect. Cross refuses to let all his effort go to waste, so he takes a shot at the spider's head, but a single arrow isn't going to be enough to damage it. Just then, Lin comes up with an idea and tells Cross to try rapid firing. Cross tries telling him that's not possible, but Lin tells him to shut up for a second and start using his storage spell more proactively. Cross had never even considered that before, but he decides to give it a try, and after firing one arrow, he uses his storage spell to summon another arrow in its place, effectively eliminating his reload time and allowing him to pierce the spider's shell. As for Yui's training, she's been practicing the mana slash all day, but she can't seem to get the hang of it. Lilith can see that she's doing her best, but she might need a little motivation. So she lets herself get attacked by a roaming panther, forcing Yui to jump in to save her. She finally managed to perform the technique, and she is extremely happy, but she also exhausted herself with all the training, so she passes out a few moments later and Lilith is forced to catch her. That night, Lloyd and the others are all sitting around the table, and they are starting to get worried since Yui isn't home yet, but just then, Lloyd hears something at the front door, and when he goes to check it out, he finds Yui laying on the doorstep, and around the block, we see Lilith walking off into the night. The next morning, the group is set to resume their journey, but Lloyd seems really upset. He feels bad because everyone else managed to learn such amazing skills, while the only thing he managed to do was optimize all of his spells, learn a few new attack spells for large-scale battles, and develop an original search spell. Somehow in Lloyd's head, none of that is as impressive as what the others did, and the group is really getting sick of how little he values himself. This was the end of episode 8. Subscribe to not miss the next part.